afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Post-lunch session, so pardon us, or pardon me if we sound a little lazy, but I assure you that we are going to have a very, very interesting session. It was a hot topic even in our last OTM. We have gone through so much in the last 2 years that we thought that we should repeat this kind of a session. What is the heading of the session? Key challenges and opportunities in the emerging new world order post-pandemic and how tourism boards are adapting to them. I think it's still a very big challenge. We used to talk about disruptions in business like, it was a positive thing, but now disruption means something very different. We had this pandemic, and then we had this kind of a conflict in Ukraine, and then bad news keeps coming, So and then there is a tremendous kind of a, reorganization, or the patterns are quite changing in terms of geopolitics also, and it is quite linked to tourism because then where the markets are, which markets are open, how to access those markets. All this is going through a kind of a big change. And so to address this question, we have a very distinguished panel. We would like to hear from them. Mr. Philip Dickinson, Vice President International Markets of Qatar Tourism. Ms. Kathy Koyambole, Regional Director, Asia Pacific of Tourism Fiji. Mr. Baharuj Asgarov, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Azerbaijan Tourism Board. And I have some, I had prepared some kind of curious questions as an onlooker. And so, in the next about 40 minutes or so, I would like to pose those questions to our very distinguished panelists. We'll have about 10 minutes of Q&A if you have any questions. So, let me just get my act together. Yeah, so, I thought that I would first ask, is your inbound back to the pre-pandemic level? Or if not, then when do you see it coming back? Can we start with you?
Thank you very much, Sanjeev, and thank you for this opportunity for being here and having this chance to address to you and the OTM community. And congratulations with such a great show. Every year it's getting better and better. And as Azerbaijan Tourism Board and along with our 14 partners from Azerbaijan, we are very happy to be here and meet new faces and also see our partners and friends. When it comes to the numbers and recovery, we know that the best, let's say, record number of travelers we received in 2019, it was about 3.2 million people coming to Azerbaijan from other countries. Obviously, with the pandemic, we had a big disruption, especially during the lockdown. And later on, we started reopening the country from summer of 2021, but with a very limited list of countries. We started off with the three, such as Turkey and Russia, but later on the list of the countries got expanded. Currently, we have the country is open for more than 100 countries all over the world. It's fairly easy to come to the country because of the very innovative visa system. So in 2022, we did a bit under 1 million tourists coming to the country. As I said, it was due to the fact that some countries were still not allowed to enter Azerbaijan. But starting from the 2022, this was like a road and path to recovery. And we started getting numbers and we started seeing the recovery. In 2022, we finished with 1.6 million tourists. It's 49% 29% behind of what we achieved in 2019. But I have to say that the tourism expenditure, I mean the tourism benefits and the spendings are still in place. We actually had a very similar numbers to 2019 in terms of the tourist spending, but in terms of number, obviously we are lagging behind. Nevertheless, in most of the countries, especially in Asia, GCC, we are recovered, and certain countries are even performing better than 2019. For example, Saudi Arabia has become one of our top, our key source markets, and they are showing even better numbers than 2019. India has performed outstandingly this year. We also can say that the country has recovered. We had tenfold increase in the number of Indians to Azerbaijan, which makes us very happy. And the only markets that we are lagging behind currently, I would say, is Europe. It was because of a bigger disruptions and also in the problems with the value chain. Starting from this year, we are also fully back to the European markets, and we believe that we will see a fast recovery from that region as well.
So, Kathy, we know on an annual basis, probably recovery is not yet fully there. But on a kind of, let's say, if you take a short term, like month to month, you know. So, let's say if you looked at last month or this calendar year, January, do you think you're back to pre-COVID, or is still some way to go?
Sorry, can you hear me? Can everyone? Okay, Mbolo Vinaka, first of all, thank you for having us here today. Fiji is such a wild card for those of you who don't know where Fiji is, because it's pretty far. We're very close neighbors to Australia and New Zealand. So just thank you for having us here today. With regards to whether we're close to pre-pandemic levels, we had set a target to reach 2019 levels in 2024. Our calendar year last year, we actually reached 70% of that. So we're pretty excited about that, and that was even without having Asia open. So yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's good news. Phil, what about you?
Yeah. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here on behalf of Qatar Tourism. Yes, so ours was a very good year last year, but you got to take the World Cup effect into consideration, which is obviously the world's largest sporting event, which did a fantastic job in terms of putting us on the map. So we exceeded our 2019 numbers last year. We finished at about 2.6 million visitors in 2022, versus we had 2.1 million in 2019. So before we get too excited and patting ourselves on the back too much, then 1.1 million of those visitors were visitors for the World Cup tournament. So we have to factor that in. But I think because we are on that correct trajectory, and our plans, certainly as tourism, are very much around for us, it was all about pre and post World Cup anyway, because you know, if people are coming for the World Cup, they're coming for the World Cup, and I think everybody had an amazing experience. But I think the advantage for us as a tourism destination is that there was a huge amount of infrastructural changes that happened in the destination. That gives us more tourism product and more reasons for people to come to the destination. So 100 plus hotels added, new shopping malls, new restaurants, new attractions, new water parks, new metro system, effectively a new city with Lusail. So we've got far more to offer the tourist. We had a good tourism offering previously, and now we have even more for people to see and do in Qatar. So I think from our perspective, and you asked the correct question about how, and it's very important for us because it's post World Cup, you know, how are we performing so far this year? And we're definitely seeing a post World Cup boom. We're seeing momentum. We're seeing our numbers. Our January numbers are far out exceeding our 22 numbers and our 2019 numbers. So that's exactly where we want to be, basically. Now we want to continue on that trajectory. And the same, as my colleague, as other panelists were mentioning, it's about accessibility as well. I mean, you know, we have 95 countries that it's visa-free. There's no cost and there's no paperwork to fill in to get into the country. We do have India's a massively important market for us. It's our second largest market. And some interesting statistic, I mean, people may not know, but the nationality with the most amount of spectators for the World Cup was India. Which, I mean, if you think that they're coming up against countries where it's a religion, football's a religion, like Mexico and Brazil and Argentina and to an extent England and those sort of countries, but yet the Indian market surpassed them in terms of visitors. So I think, you know, the accessibility, we're blessed with fantastic airlift from, and that's critical. Connectivity is critical for the success of any destination. We have the fantastic network of Qatar Airways for not just for India when we fly out of not just the main cities in India, but Qatar Airways also flies out the second and third tier cities in India as well. So accessibility is very good, and we have some of the low-cost carriers from India flying in as well. So I think the fact that we're, easy air access, no cost or paperwork for visas, the plenty of product. It's a close by. It's very India friendly. We have obviously a lot of Indians that live and work in Qatar as well. So yeah, I mean we're very happy and we're on the right path. We want to stay. We want to stay invested in We're very interested in the India business. We want to continue to work with as closely as we can with the trade. Incentivize them, co-op marketing deals with the tour operators, encourage the weddings, encourage the MICE business. So we're certainly open for business with India, and we want to continue that growth trajectory.
That's quite encouraging. That's in fact encouraging for all of us. That if we are lucky and do things right, then we can exceed. In fact, the 2019 pre-pandemic. So that's very good news indeed. Let's turn to China. We heard in the morning, we know that China was the largest outbound emerging market, And so, you see already Chinese coming back, or are your flights already starting like the previous levels? And if not, when do you see this happening, in months or years? When do you see Chinese coming back in full vigor like earlier?
Well, as we know, China is the top outbound country, or is considered right now because of the pandemic. They cannot travel. With the new opening, people have very high hopes for China returning, but personally, I don't think it's going to happen very soon. Even though people are very unlike in other countries, the moment the borders were open, people really wanted to travel. The reports that we receive from China shows that the Chinese citizens are still reconsidering major travel abroad because of a long period of lockdowns and a lot of questions with regards to the pandemic. Simultaneously, once they announced the opening, we can see that the COVID levels started rising in the country, and immediately certain countries around China started applying and implementing extra restrictions and documentation for the Chinese travelers to enter. So I personally don't think it's going to happen very soon. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that we should ignore China and not do anything. Even though I'll tell from our experience, in 2019 we signed a new deal with the Chinese government, and Azerbaijan was part of ADS program, and we started receiving a lot of Chinese tourists to Azerbaijan. And immediately the tourism industry started shifting their business model to accommodate more and more Chinese travelers coming to Azerbaijan. Right now, even though during the pandemic there was no conversions and there were no tourists coming to the country, we kept our marketing activities, especially on social media, not targeting conversion, but trying to keep our destination on the top of mind of travelers in China. And actually today I received an email that Azerbaijan won a sustainability cultural I want to share this news with you too. I actually received it only a half an hour ago. Well, now it didn't come up, but so it means that Azerbaijan has been very, very active in the market, and we are still keep doing it. Also, there are certain investments that we have done in the market targeting conversions, and we are waiting the right moment also to start implementing these campaigns. Nevertheless, Azerbaijan is open for Chinese travelers. We don't have any extra restrictions and documentations that are required to enter the country. It's very actually simple and straightforward. If you have the COVID passport, as it's called, proving that you have the full cycle of vaccination or you have recovered from COVID, then you can enter the country. And Azerbaijan airlines are also have started their flights to China as well. So there are different activities happening, and we are looking forward to welcoming Chinese tourists back soon.
So Kathy, was China an important market before COVID, and how is it doing now, or when do you expect this to come back?
Oh, absolutely. China was number 4 for Fiji. Yeah, just shortly after Australia, New Zealand, North America, then it was China. So we were fortunate enough to make the top 20 list for outbound on China's safe list, first of all. But similarly, we don't expect the immediate pickup. And just like what Phil had mentioned, access is key. So for our travelers out of mainland China, our access point was Hong Kong. So we are putting in direct flights again, operated by Fiji Airways out of Hong Kong and Narita, come April, first week of April. So we're pretty excited about it, but in terms of the actual pickup, we don't expect it to take off as quick as it was before. Yeah.
Phil, what would you like to add?
Yeah, listen, I think Kathy and Bashir covered it, but it's about for us, there was a lot of air access coming from, there was a lot of connectivity out of China pre-pandemic. And of course now there's the sort of readiness and busyness of Qatar Airways to try and get those routes back in operation, because those went down to pretty much nothing over the pandemic. So I think it was 10 or 11 cities that Qatar Airways were flying in and out of, and currently it's just 2. So we don't have that. So you've got to renegotiate those bilateral agreements to get the airlift sorted out. Similarly, we kept very active in the China market because we know how important the market is, particularly because obviously it's like anything, isn't it? If you can't do something for such a prolonged period of time, of course you're going to want to do it when you can. And the other interesting thing with China, of course, is because it's such an enormous population, is that even the Chinese passport holders that are not living in China is a large population. So you have a lot of Chinese living in Europe or living in Dubai or other parts of the Middle East. So we were still getting a lot of Chinese nationals coming in even when they weren't able to travel in and out freely of China. So it's not as if that we were closed for Chinese nationals, basically. So yeah, important for us. From our perspective, we need that airlift sorted out as quickly as possible. And of course, we're also trying to encourage. We had China Southern. We had some other carriers other than our national carrier, Qatar Airways, that were flying pre-pandemic. So we're sort of starting those conversations to get other metal into the destination as well. But listen, I think we all agree it's China, along with India. I think the numbers highlight it. The numbers pre-pandemic, two of the fastest growing markets globally, as opposed to other markets that were, plateauing and declining. We know Europe's a bit of a challenge at the moment because of the cost of living increases, inflation, and things like these sort of going on in. So they haven't got as much disposable income as they had before. So I think large markets, you only have to get a smaller percentage of a much bigger market to achieve the same goals. So I think we'd be naive not to keep an eye on it, but a lot of it is a bit dependent on the airlift, and also we've taken the stance, or our Ministry of Public Health has taken the stance along with a lot of other countries we're still insisting that Chinese take a PCR test within 48 hours of arrival. That's the only country that has that stipulation, but that's something that's in play at the moment. So until that goes away, you could argue that perhaps we're not as accessible as other destinations. But it's a market similarly to India that you certainly can't ignore.
Sure. So it seems it will be a while, but they will come back definitely, but it may be a while. So my next questions, in fact, I would punch two questions. I think they may be interrelated or they may not be interrelated. But see, what about Western markets? We keep hearing, traditional Western markets like Europe, US, some recessionary trends, economic recession. And then there is a war-like situation in Eastern Europe, or at least in Ukraine and Russia. How does it affect, if at all, your markets in the short run as well as in the medium term? You have what it was like before COVID, and is it coming back, or when do you see it coming back? And how the Ukraine situation affects you, if at all? Because in India we realize that it could be sometimes somebody's loss can be somebody's gain, So how do you relate to these questions, Baruch?
Thank you. I remember when this war started, we were also present at OTM, and this was one of the platforms where we were discussing it. For us, I'll speak from the Azerbaijan perspective, because pre-pandemic, obviously, Ukraine and Russia were among top countries where we receive the tourists from, and even after the war, we don't see much have changed. What the shift we see is that the Russians visiting Azerbaijan have increased, but we should also look at the segmentation of these travelers, because there are now we see different segments. There are people who are traveling to Azerbaijan not only for tourism purpose, but also as a place to live and work, because it's neighbors with Russia, and majority of people also speak some Russian, so we see this change. But this is a trend not only for Azerbaijan, it's the same is happening is in Kazakhstan, in Georgia, and in other neighboring countries to Russia. We see that the expenditure has increased because now Russians not only buy tourism services, but they are also investing in the economy of the country. They are buying real estate. They are bringing their businesses over to these countries. This is how, in terms of Russians coming to Azerbaijan, have affected. But we can also see the ski resorts, for example, in Azerbaijan this year mainly were booked by Russians, because in Azerbaijan we have two main ski resorts, one in Shahdagh and another one in Tufandagh in Gebele. So we see the share of Russians booking the rooms and the services have tremendously increased, and it makes sense because it's close, it's fair, affordable, but you also get a very good quality of the service. International chain hotels are present in the ski resorts, very good restaurants, the new properties are being opened, all of the resorts are ski in and ski out, so this brings a lot of opportunity for them. And when we come to the Western markets, as I mentioned earlier, we are still behind of our numbers in 2019. Yet we've been active in the market. We recently finished our road shows in German-speaking countries, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But we also see new markets opening for us. Poland is the country that we were not very much focused earlier, but starting from the last year with the opening of LOT Airlines to Azerbaijan, we are very active in Eastern Europe as well, and the numbers are increasing significantly. But nevertheless, we are still behind of what our numbers in 2019. We see positive increase in that. Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the main impacts we had to inherit from the conflict was, I think like the rest of the world, was the increase in the price of fuel. So naturally, everything then had the inflation costs. And the government did step in at some point to subsidize some of those costs. But naturally, as a long-haul destination from Asia and even UK, Europe, we will be, the positioning of being an expensive destination would have resonated even a lot more because of the inflated price. With respect to the Western market, so we actually had a new strategy. So into North America, we had put in a direct flight to also from to Vancouver. And they had changed the strategy a bit in North America, in the US especially, to target the mid-America, because usually Fiji was positioned as a boutique destination targeting honeymooners, but what we're now doing is also targeting the mid-America, where there's a lot of group travel, so just shifting out of our traditional target segments. Yeah.
It's good. Phil, what would you say?
Listen, I think the way I see it is it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because and I hate the term, by the way, and somebody mentioned it earlier, but everyone uses the term of revenge trap. I don't like it, right? But the reality is that I think what has come out of COVID is that people are perhaps thinking, well, that trip that I would have put off, or that place that I wanted to go, maybe at some point, they're probably doing it now rather than later, because I think it's changed people's mindset. So I think that's absolutely a positive. But I think the other thing that we shouldn't forget is that as we're still in this coming out of COVID situation, there is still constraints on air capacity and routes, and slight challenges in versus what it was in pre-pandemic times, when there was a lot more flights and it was perhaps cheaper to fly. And then we can't ignore in Europe, particularly the crisis with Ukraine and Russia. That's definitely having an impact in terms of, as I said, cost of living for a lot of European countries. We see that. And of course, if people were, you've probably seen it in the UK, and there's a lot of strikes going on in the UK at the moment because people are, you're hearing that teachers and nurses, because the cost of living has gone up so much, are having to get food from food banks. Imagine teachers and nurses having to go to food banks to put food on the table. I mean, you'd never heard of that in the European markets before. So obviously these cost of living increases are hitting people's pockets. So then you've got a smaller attainable market in terms of the people that can afford to travel to these these longer haul destinations or mid haul destinations. So I think that you can look at it two ways. I think of course the European markets will always be important. I think you've got to look at the size of the market, right? So India's still growing, but the India market was 28 million people in 2019. The UK market was 90 million outbound people. So you just need to do the maths, basically. But now, we know that the Indian market is growing exponentially. It's going to take a little time to catch up to 90 million, but you could argue that that 90 million might start decreasing, while that 28 million it could be on a growth trajectory for the next few years. So I think it's a case of you should keep investing in that market certainly with the traditional partners. We know who they are. They're very established, very grown up travel companies across Europe. They're very established traditional markets, and I think they'll always be able to help us as destinations. But I think we all probably agree, and we keep coming back round to it, but I think we all agree that markets like India and China is probably another good example of where potentially the future is going to be in terms of where we're going to see the exponential growth.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting, and it gives us a nice opportunity to segue, or rather, ride on a helicopter at a high level and look at it from a very high level. If these changes so far we have discussed, these look like, okay, imminent changes or short-term changes, which would sort of, find its balance back. But some of these, do you think could permanently change the outlook? Let's say your advertising budget or your promotional plans or how you look at the global markets. Do you see this kind of, these changes we have discussed so far is sort of, in the medium to long term, permanently changing your strategy, where do you see your market in terms of, your advertising dollar or number of incoming tourists? If that is not very clear, what I mean is that, look, so far it seems that we are in a crisis mode and we are trying to sort of, bring back everything to 2019 level, But going forward, do you see that some of these changes may stay with us and you would focus on some markets and, sort of change your focus from certain markets and focus on certain markets?
Oh, absolutely. The work we were doing in 2019 and the trends, the emerging trends, and also the shift in the flow of the tourists is very different right now. I mean, there are a couple of directions we can look at. One is the trends that are emerging, and they demand new range of products and the new experiences. Another direction is the new countries emerge as source markets. Because of this transition period and the clashes in certain countries, we also reconsider the investment we've been doing. And certainly we cannot go on similar to what we've been doing in 2019. We have to take these changes in account. I mean, obviously, I think it's a big news here. Everyone is discussing India becoming new China in 2023. I mean, the most populous country in 2023, and in future becoming new China. Obviously, there is still a lot of work to be done for this potential to happen. And I believe certain destinations now realize that they should have, for example, invested in India many years ago and not to start anymore, because certain markets who've been in Indian market, they have a stronger stance, and it will be easier for them to continue in this uneasy environment, considering also India is such a important market. But coming to your question, definitely, it's a transition period. We have to be vigilant and very open to look at the new trends, look at what the travelers are demanding, look at the economic situation that is changing all around the world, and change our plans, not change, but readapt our strategies accordingly.
Okay, so my regions for Fiji were always strategic regions because we were all emerging destinations for Fiji, yeah? So in that sense, Australia, New Zealand will always be the primary focus, but for my regions, we'd always be the ones to stay longer, spend more, and fill the troughs, for Fiji at least. Eh? So in terms of strategy, we'll likely retain that. Sure. And we've been also fortunate enough here that Australia and New Zealand have big budgets to make such a big splash in market here in India. So what we do is just ride off those waves and just add on Fiji.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Phil, are you up to recalibrating your strategy for good to some extent?
Yeah. Listen, I totally agree with Kathy and Baruch. I mean, you got to fish where the fish are, right? So to use the old adage, but look, we've done a lot of research, and because the other thing, if you're launching a destination, I mean, the thing with Qatar is that they're on a journey, because certainly prior to Qatar winning the World Cup in 2010, they were quite happily going along, keeping themselves, taking business organically, taking the regional business. But of course, by winning that bid, and in the 12 years subsequently, they they added 100% more capacity, right? So if you've got 100% more hotel rooms to fill, then you've got to find a way to fill them. So, and of course, there's other things like it's an economic driver and it's a job creator, and it increases your contribution to GDP. So I think those things you look at. But we've done our homework, and what you've got to look at is you've got to look at the addressable, which I'm sure fellow panelists will do exactly the same. What's your addressable? So what we did is we looked at where where's most of the traffic coming from, and where's their propensity to travel to. Now, you're 100% right, though you could argue that those market dynamics might have changed over the COVID period, so we may have to calibrate that. But in the main, you look at the amount of capacity that's coming in, their propensity to travel, how much they spend, how long they stay. And we're quite blessed in Qatar because of our geographical location, because it's a hub, right? So, you've got 600 flights a day in and out of Hamad International Airport, for 40 million passengers a year. So, again, that's a big addressable market. So we're looking at, for us, it's not just point-to-point traffic, it's stopover. We'll happily take that, because if you get even a small percentage of 40 million staying a couple of nights, you're going to hit all your targets. Now, yes, we won't ignore the point-to-point, because we want longer stays and we want people spending more time. And we haven't even touched on cruise. I mean, cruise is another big sector for us. We've just built a fabulous new port that can take 2 mega ships at any one time. So we're talking to all the big cruise lines, and when a mega ship comes in, that's 4,000 or 5,000 people in one hit, right? And what we're doing with the cruise lines is we're saying, look, rather than you just pulling your cruise ships in as part of a Middle East itinerary, why don't you home port in Qatar? Previously they did a lot of home porting in Dubai. Dubai's been very successful on home porting. So our job now as Doha is to say, well, look, we've got this state-of-the-art, fabulous new cruise port. We've got air connections coming in from everywhere on Qatar Airways. So why don't you start home porting in Qatar rather than home porting in Dubai? And that gives you a big hit, because as you say, if you've got 4,000 or 5,000 passengers on we've got scheduled 93 ports of call this year with the mega ships. So 92 times by 4,000 it's a big number. But at the moment they're just transiting, so they're in port, they hop off, they go to the souk, buy a nice souvenir, and then they leave. So we're not getting room nights, or we're not getting longer stays. So home porting is important. So yeah, we've identified about 15 markets, and we've even put those into tiers. So we'll have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 markets. So I'm sure my fellow panelists have done exactly the same. And that's, to your point, that's where we're going to do a whole 360, whether it's consumer campaigns, whether it's PR, whether it's digital activity, or whether it's trade activity. So we'll have a 360 approach. In perhaps the tier 2 markets, we might not have a 360, but we'll be just focused on the trade as our fulfillment. Or in our tier 3, it might be just working with 2 or 3 partners rather than having a rep office and doing other things. So it will vary market by market. You can't be everywhere. We can't spread ourselves. We don't have the budgets to spread ourselves too thinly. So as I said, back to my original point is, we've got to fish where the fish are and make sure that we make our government's money work as hard as it can to drive the numbers.
Very well captured. So if there are any interventions from the audience, or otherwise I would just sum up. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So if anyone would like to say anything, you can come forward and take my mic. And meanwhile, for me, the takeaways are as follows. You see, like the Maldivian minister said this morning, bye-bye COVID, bye-bye pandemic. That's true, but it seems that it has a half-life still carrying on. And so, the bad news is behind us, but we still have to cope up with some of the backlog. Sometimes it's due to visa processing, flights not operating, or sometimes simply the demand takes a little while to come back. We keep hearing about emerging new world order in geopolitical discussions, and that does affect tourism, in my opinion, and both in the short, medium, and long run. And certain coldness might have developed between, let's say, some parts of the world, where it's like no-go, almost no-go kind of a situation, let's say, between Russia and Western countries. And so, somebody's loss is somebody's gain, and this kind of a rearrangement will happen. We have started getting a good amount of Russian tourists, a lot of Indians going to Russia. So that realization is there that some of the geopolitical changes are going to stay with us. And of course, the China story is well known. The biggest emerging market is still closed. Maybe it will take a while for them to come back to full vigor. But India, if not the next China, it has the potential to act as a kind of a sponge or fallback market for a lot of this lacuna in the market. At least in the short run, and who knows, in the long run, it may become a phenomena like China. So, of course, a lot of this reset could stay with us in the medium to long run. And of course, we must also talk about. We also talked about the recessionary trend in the West. So that would be a very, very interesting thing to watch very cautiously, because no one knows what happens in the, let's say, forthcoming years. If it turns into a full-blown recession, then it is obviously it cannot come back that fast. And the population numbers being what they are, that market may have certain limitations per se, So, I think it was a thought-provoking discussion, and we have captured all of this, and it is telecast live. We are going to circulate it. It will benefit a lot of NTOs and a lot of countries. So, thank you very much all for your presence. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Behrooj, for enlightening us. They deserve a much bigger round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.